Hi, this is Mr. Truitt. I wanted to follow up on where we left off in class on Tuesday. We started to go over the slide deck about how to write an introduction and conclusion paragraph. We only got through a few slides, and even at that, we kind of rushed through it. So I wanted to try to spend a few minutes going over the slide deck. I've updated what was posted there and included some examples for some of the different concepts from the readings so far this semester. So starting on the intro, we talked a little bit about this hamburger analogy. Um, we so far, we have covered the meat and the meat portion of the analogy with the thesis and the body paragraphs. So the intro and the conclusion covers the other half. The top half of the bun is the intro, and the bottom half is the conclusion. So when you start thinking about the intro paragraph, start thinking about the structure of the intro paragraph. You start off with the hook, which we talked about a little bit in class, and we'll look at some examples here in a minute, and then the summary of the text and the thesis. And you'll notice, it's an upside down triangle. The reason for that is, as you look at it, the visual clues, it's wider at the top. The hook is meant to be, somewhat broad. It's supposed to not be real specific in how it's applied. And then as you go further down, the summary of the text, gets more specific to the story or the poem or the play. And then the thesis is a very specific, very focused statement. So that's why we give you that visual. Okay, so the hook. The first thing you need to do in an introduction is, to have that attention grabber. In a literary analysis essay like this, it's best if you can try to focus the hook around the theme that you're discussing. So a couple of ways that you can do this among the many that are out there is to start off with either a relevant quotation from the work. Here's an example here that we've offered from To Kill a Mockingbird, where you say, you never really understand a person until you consider things from his point of view. That's something that reaches out and makes you want to read further. Or you can start with a strong, insightful, or startling statement. So here, example, the journey from childhood into adulthood can be as painful as it is inevitable. So you want to make the reader want to read further of what you've written. So I provided some examples from the class readings. Example of an interesting observation. So for Dead Man's Path, a teacher's job usually only requires them to think about making lesson plans, teaching students, grading assignments, and other classroom activities. Michael Obie's job requires much more of him. The schoolmaster in Chinua Achebe's story, The Dead Man's Path, has to consider the dead spirits of the villagers' ancestors and the souls of the new children arriving as a basic part of his job. So, as an attention grabber, it offers an interesting observation or an anecdote that you're going to apply to the main character, which leads into the theme of the story when you get talking about how Michael Obie wants to get rid of all of the traditions. So that opening anecdote emphasizes how it's part of his job and it's going to cause conflict once you get to the summary of the background of the story. Another way of approaching the hook is to ask a rhetorical question. So, for instance, a hook that starts with a rhetorical question. If someone asks a question to which there's no real answer, such as "What is the meaning of life?" How do you answer it? What kinds of things do you consider? In the dilemma tale, The Five Helpers, readers are asked to ponder exactly this kind of unanswerable question. So you are reaching out to the reader. In this case, it would be me, but if you were writing for another teacher, you would be reaching out, you would be addressing them, asking them to think about, how they would approach this kind of question. You could also start with the quote or a quote from the story. That was one of the suggestions in the previous slide. Um, so, drawing from The Hunger Artist, you could say, when the artist in Franz Kafka's short story, The Hunger Artist, confesses that he has no choice but to be hungry, he gives a perplexing explanation. Because I couldn't find any food that I liked. Had I found some, believe me, I wouldn't have made a fuss. I would have stuffed myself like you and everyone else. So you can use that quote to catch the reader's attention, and then that would lead into your summary, the background information that you're going to provide about the story in the intro paragraph. And then finally, attention grabbing scenario about the piece of string. I mean, no, I'm sorry, the long exile. Even when life seems good and the future is bright, a sudden change in fortunes can appear to even the most successful person. They could wake up and go about their day as usual and suddenly find themselves falsely accused of a crime that they spend the rest of their life being punished for. Such was the fate of Ivan Dmitrievich Aksenov, the protagonist of Leo Tolstoy's story, The Long Exile. So you start in your paragraph offering a scenario to think about, that you apply to the character that you're going to write about. So those are four ways that you could go about creating the hook. Now, as you start your paper, you're going to want to include the title and the author pretty much straight up front. So as you'll notice, in all of the examples that I gave here, I included the author as well as the name of the work right up front. So you want to make sure that you punctuate and spell both correctly. And since you have access to the story in the book, as well as you can go online and find these stories, the titles and the authors' names, there's really no excuse for you not getting the names correctly, either the author or the work. As far as punctuation goes, books, plays, newspapers, movies, and albums, or other longer or complete works get italicized. Short stories, poems, shorter works get quotation marks. So if you were going to write about Oedipus Rex, the Greek tragedy Oedipus Rex by Sophocles has fascinated readers for centuries. So Oedipus would be italicized there. In Chinua Achebe's novel, Things Fall Apart, the legacy of colonialism is explored. So you see how I included the author's name at the beginning and then identified it as a novel. As a novel, it would be a longer work and it gets italicized. Now, if you look at one of his stories, the short story Dead Man's Path by Chinua Achebe tells the story of Michael Obi, a young African man who seeks to impose European values. So in this case, because it's a shorter story, it's it's not a book length or a complete work. In that respect, it gets quotes. And then I wanted to throw in a different type of work than what we've looked at so far. Look at how to cite a poem. So after reading Robert Frost's poem, The Road Not Taken, many readers examine their own lives to see if they made the best decisions. So in this case, it's a short poem. It would get it would get quotation marks. Okay, so that is, going about uh, offering the hook and introducing the work, making sure the reader knows what the work that you're studying is. So the next step in the in the introduction is the summary. So um, since the body's going to analyze the key literary elements, you're going to dig in and look at details and try to pick it apart. Um, you're going to want to give a brief summary up front so that the reader is kind of oriented and knows, who the characters are you're talking about. Some of the basic plot lines, some of the basic information about the story. But it also, you don't want the summary to be too long or too detailed because, like I said, the purpose of the body paragraphs is to really dig in. Um, so for the sake of time, I'm not going to show the video here for the five five finger summary. I'm going to let you pause the video here and watch the video, in the slide deck itself on D2L. And then once you have watched the video, you can come back and we will pick up looking at the five finger summary and look at how to apply it and look at a couple of examples of how it works. So I'm going to pause here for you, and then you can come back and we will be on the next slide.
Okay, but
Okay. So the five finger summary, just to go over it real quickly again, somebody that's the character that you're focusing on, wanted. It's an important action related to your theme. So it's got to be, it's got to be related directly to what you're talking about. Some of these more complicated or longer stories, there's a lot of action, there's a lot of plot twists or information related to the action and the plot. You want to try to be as focused as possible on the plot as it relates to your theme. But when you get to that's the main conflict of the story, or at least of the scene that you are analyzing. Then is the tension in the conflict, or how the character tries to deal with the conflict, and then how everything ends, how everything gets resolved. So since we are doing our first five finger summary, for first official in an assignment on the planner for Oedipus this week, I thought that we could summarize that. That'll give you at least a little bit of information, for working on your planner this weekend. So the somebody in Oedipus would be Oedipus. Wanted. So Oedipus wanted to find the murderer to relieve Thebes of the plague, but it's revealed that Oedipus himself is the murderer. Then Oedipus blinds himself after discovering he is the cause of the plague. And then Oedipus is no longer king of Thebes and is preparing to be exiled in the desert. So you could use this, start off with a catchy hook, something related to him blinding himself, or, have you ever known somebody who always takes things to the extreme, then you could work the five finger summary in from that hook sentence using, this information here. Now, it's not going to always line up perfectly. You will have to add to, some of the sentences. You might have to add an extra sentence or two, or add a little bit extra information than what's included in the five finger summary. But this at least gives you the framework or structure for starting to build a concise and useful summary for the introduction. So if you're going to write a summary paragraph from a five-finger summary, here is a template that you could copy and use, to fill in the details as you're working. So in the title of the text, the somebody, the somebody wanted, but, and then so, and then you fill in, what's in the parentheses. So if we were going to fill in using our five-finger summary on the previous page, it would look something like this. In Oedipus Rex by Sophocles, King Oedipus wanted to find a cure for the plague that was ravaging Thebes, but he discovered that he was the cause of the plague. So Oedipus punishes himself by blinding himself and orders himself banished from Thebes. Then, no longer the king, Oedipus prepares to wander in the desert. So like I said, as you can see, I changed some of the wording and added some details that weren't in the original five-finger summary, but breaking it down that way gives you a framework to start from. So we have so far, we have the hook and we've done the summary. Now we're getting to the thesis statement. So before you write your thesis statement, you might need a sentence, to transition between the summary and the theme. You'll just see as you're writing if it flows well directly from the summary to the thesis. But in any case, however, you need to structure that, your thesis is still going to be the same. The thesis is, we've talked about that pretty much every week to some detail or to some level of detail. But just as a reminder, the thesis statement is going to be a debatable claim. It's something that you would have to prove or that can be proved using your theme statement and the literary elements you're going to use to prove the theme. So, for example, in the piece of string, Guy de Maupassant's use of characterization and irony shows that even though the townspeople treated him unfairly, Rochecorn is ultimately to blame for his misery because he allowed something trivial to take over his life. So using that thesis statement, I've provided a claim, that he's ultimately to blame for his misery. And because, and, I go on to make a claim about why he's to blame for the miserable state that he ends up in. But I also included the name of the story, the author, as well as the literary characteristics or elements that you're going to use to prove your point or show how they operate in the story. Okay, so piecing together the introduction paragraph for the piece of string. So you would come up with a hook. You would do a five-finger summary. So in the case of the piece of string, the somebody would be Maître Hochecorn he wanted to save a piece of string he found in case it might be useful later, but he was accused of stealing Maître Holbrook's wallet by Maître Malandan. Then Maître Hochecorn became obsessed with proving his innocence. And then so Hochecorn dies miserable and broken because no one would believe him. And then the thesis is where you would identify the theme. We just, I provided an example on the previous slide. So actually putting this into, into use or into actual written form. So a hook here could be, people often hold on to things that seem unimportant in case they might be needed someday. In the case of Maître Hochecorn, in Guy de Maupassant's story, A Piece of String, His obsession with trivial things ruins his life. Then the summary. Hoshkorn stoops to pick up a piece of string out of the mud from the street, thinking it might be useful in the future. His enemy says that Hoshkorn was picking up Mitra Holbrook's wallet, which had gone missing, and not a piece of string. The charges of stealing the wallet are eventually dropped, but Hoshkorn spends the rest of his life trying to prove his innocence to the townspeople. His obsession with other people's opinions of him overwhelms him, and Maitre Hochkorn dies miserable and broken because no one believes him. And then that leads into characterization and irony are used to show that even though the townspeople treated him unfairly, Hochkorn is ultimately to blame for his misery because he allowed something trivial to take over his life. So, so that is you can see, how that process works out, and you can see an example of hook, summary, and thesis using the piece of string. So then if we were going to close out this hypothetical essay that we're working on here, so we would go to the conclusion paragraph. Conclusion paragraph is just the opposite in terms of starting with a fairly focused statement, a restatement of the thesis, and then going out, summarizing the main ideas. So you get a little bit wider, and then the lasting thought is where you would provide maybe a broader, more philosophical or reflective response to close out the essay. So if we were, writing this hypothetical essay and trying to conclude it, restatement of the theme or thesis, when Hoshkorn can't let go of the need to clear his name, he shows that sometimes the way someone reacts to difficulties affects their lives more than the actual difficulties. Then the summary would be a couple sentences that summarize each point, major point of what you use to prove your claim, and then lasting thought. And this lasting thought, I think, gets a lot of people. A lot of times you're tempted in the conclusion to start off in conclusion, or to summarize. That's how a lot of people, they kind of just naturally want to begin the conclusion sentence with phrases like that, in conclusion or in summary. And then you really, I'd like to see you try to avoid doing that. A well-written conclusion, will make it clear that you are wrapping up the essay in how you, start to reflect on what's been said and what it means. So a possible lasting thought. So in the same way that you're trying to catch the reader's attention with the hook at the beginning, this lasting thought is grabbing their attention, for what they should take away, what you want them to take away from the essay. So your goal here should be to show why the points you made or the themes you discuss matter. It's ideal if you can come back, and touch something on, something related to your original theme. So a couple of, suggestions that I was thinking of for this essay would be you could possibly reflect on how Hoshkorn's life could have turned out differently, or how he could have reacted that would have changed things. What if he had ignored the people? What if he responded to their ridicule the same way that Aksenov in The Long Exile responds to his difficulties? So for a lasting thought example, I came up with Oshkorn's inability to accept that the world is flawed and full of mean people and injustice cost him his life. Okay, so that pretty much wraps up the slide deck. I synthesized all this and put it together as if it was actually being submitted as a paper, and gave you a sample of what the first page of an properly formatted MLA essay would look like. Obviously, the conclusion at the bottom wouldn't come immediately after the introduction, but you can see how on the first page at the top where you need to have your last name and the page number in the upper right-hand corner using the header, and then a properly formatted information about your name, teacher's name, what the class is, and date. And then you see, how to properly place the title, and then the first line of each paragraph getting indented a half inch. So I'm going to upload, this deck that I walked through, so you can go through and see the actual slides themselves to review. And I'm also going to upload this document so you can have it to refer to. So with that, I'm going to bring it to a close, and I look forward to seeing you guys, seeing what you come up with for your Oedipus planner, and I'll see you next Tuesday.